welcome to the BSC podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, Emil Farkas, martial artist, historian, um, one of the old timers, long timers, been in martial arts for practically all his life. Owned one of the first commercial dojos here in America, and so hopefully you'll enjoy this. And if you do, click on the link, subscribe, turn on your notifications. Emil, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for coming in.
Look, pleasure to meet you, Emil. My pleasure.
So, Emil, take us back to the start, where you came from, and how did you end up in America?
Well, I was I was born in Hungary, and I started martial arts in Hungary. It was a very unique, crazy thing. I was a little kid. I was 8 years old, and like every other school, there were bullies, and bullies used to chase me. I was a great runner. And one day, I tripped. They caught up, pounded me, and then ran off. And on my way home, I saw this gigantic poster. At that particular time, one of the boxers in Hungary won the gold medal, became very, very famous. There was a big poster of him who had just written a book on boxing. I was knocking someone out, and I said, I got to learn how to box. So in Hungary, they have what they call sports clubs, where they teach all sorts of, from fencing to boxing to swimming to, because Hungary is very sports oriented. So without telling my parents, I got on the streetcar one day. I went back to one of the bigger sports clubs. And remember, I had no concept what martial arts was. There wasn't any martial arts theoretically at that time. This is 1955. So I saw boxing, third floor. So I went up to the third floor, and I'm walking along the corridor, and all of a sudden I hear. So I opened the door. I'm a little kid, 8 years old, and I see a bunch of guys in white, what I thought were pajamas, throwing each other around. I said, holy smokes, what's going on? So I sat there for about an hour, watched the class finished, then walking as they finish, the guy that was teaching it comes over and says, can I help you? I said, what is this? He says, this is something called Judo. It's just starting to catch on in Hungary. I said, well, you learned it? He said, I used to be the the driver for the Hungarian ambassador to Japan. When I was there, I learned. So I started this class. I said, this guy, I got to learn this stuff. This is better than boxing. He says, well, it'd be great, but unfortunately, we don't have a kids class. So I went back every few days and just watched. And on the fourth day, he said, well, I got some time. Come on up. And he showed me some stuff. Within 5 weeks, all the adults started bringing their own kids. So within a month, we had a kids class. That's how I started. So I started in judo.
So, without you knowing, you did something very revolutionary in Hungary. It's because of you that there was a kids class at that point in time.
Maybe true. That's very true.
Who was the gentleman that brought you in and showed you some judo technique?
His name was Arpad.
And was he famous in the martial arts world, or
No,
within
this was just a local sports club. So he wasn't anything famous. It was,
Who did he learn judo from?
well, apparently he learned at Kodokan.
Oh, so he was in the Kodokan in Japan.
Yeah, because remember, he was the driver for the ambassador, the Hungarian ambassador to Tokyo. And so he lived in Tokyo for 3 years
So,
while the ambassador was there. And he happened to discover judo, so he started training.
so it's inevitable he would have visited the
Yeah,
Kodokan.
exactly. So he went to the Kodokan and started training, got his black belt there. Then came back, and then he started teaching.
Now, so the kids class is going on. How long did you train in judo for?
I trained in judo over there for 9 months.
9 months, and then
And what happened is the Hungarian Revolution broke out. So me and my family escaped, and we ended up in Canada. Well, about 3 months after I got there, the first thing I started looking for was a judo club. And there happened to be a Y not too far away from us that happened to have a judo program. And it just so happens that the guy that was teaching it was one of the top guys out of England. He was also Kodokan trained. As a matter of fact, his name was Alfie Grabber, and he was the guy that on the British judo team. They sent him to Japan to train. So he was there for 5 years. He's a very good martial artist. So I trained with him. I trained in judo with him for about 3 years. And all of a sudden, one day, one of the guys at the judo club says, Frank Hatashta, who's the biggest judo club in Toronto, said there's some sort of demonstration of some called karate. I said, okay. So we went down there, and Mas Soroka, who was at that time the only karate instructor in Canada, was doing a demonstration with breaking and all sorts of things. This young kid, 14 years old, I think at that time, I said, holy smokes, I got to do this thing. So what ended up is, the next day, I ended up going down to Soroka's dojo. 3 days a week I was doing judo. 3 days a week I was doing karate.
Now, what system of karate was that?
I was called Chitoryu. Chitoryu was almost identical to Shotokan. But it was Chitoryu. I trained with Soroka till 65. My mother ended up with a slip disc, had to move to a warmer climate, so I moved to Canada. I moved from Canada to Toronto, and I started training there with the Tokyo Karate Federation, which was a Shotokan dojo, but almost everything was similar. And that's how my martial arts training continued. So I was doing judo. I also started Jiu-Jitsu, and I was doing the karate. So I was what they call a dojo rat. And that's how I got involved in it.
And so you're in Canada now. At this point, you get your black belt in Shotokan in Canada, and then, so what happens in Canada? So you get your black belt. You're training now in Toronto.
What happened in Canada? The guys that I was training with were hired by Phil Spector to be their bodyguards. Spector put up some money to open another dojo for them. So all of a sudden they became busy. So they asked me, because I had background in both judo and karate, and one other guy, to see if we were interested in taking over working for Phil Spector. So that's how I got involved with Phil. It was pure luck. If I would have been another dojo, it wouldn't have happened. So at that time, Phil Spector was considered the best-known record producer in America. He was at 23 years old, he was already a multimillionaire. Very flamboyant, was producing one hit record after another. So I ended up working for him for 4 years, almost 5. And through him, I started teaching privately. I started teaching with the Beach Boys, Buffalo Springfield, all the top rock groups, because he was involved with that, and a bunch of executives that, different record companies. And then one day, every time Phil was doing recording sessions, this photographer would come in, who happened to be also an actor, and it was Dennis Hopper. So Dennis Hopper and I became friendly, and I started teaching Dennis. So one day Dennis comes to me, he says, we were working out. He said, all this kicking and punching stuff, he says, it would look great in movies. I knew nothing about movies. It was the last, he said, how do you figure this would work? So he started, he was a cameraman. He knew about photography. So it's very easy to cheat. So he showed me. So throw a kick at me, and then he pretended to fall. I said, well, how's that going to look? So he took a camera, put it there, and he showed me how, if you cheated the right way, it looks like he got hit.
Now, where did this take place?
This place in Toronto.
In Toronto. You're still in Toronto. Got it.
Still in Toronto.
Yeah.
No. Well, yeah. We're now in the United States.
Oh, so what? So let's back.
Let's go back.
Let's go back.
Okay.
You're in Toronto.
I stayed in Toronto, got my black belt in judo in Toronto. Okay. Moved to California in 1965.
Why did you move to California? What spurred you to do that?
Because my mother had a slip disc, and the doctors told her that the only thing that could alleviate the pain was warm weather. So that was the reason we moved.
And you moved here to Los Angeles?
Moved to Los Angeles.
Now, why Los Angeles? Why not San Francisco, San Diego?
Only because my mother knew some people here from, from back home in Hungary, okay, who came out after the war. So we knew some people here who helped us get an apartment and whatever. judo, you know. Then I found the Tokyo Karate Federation where I started training,
And they were where?
and they were on in Hollywood,
In Hollywood.
in Hollywood on Santa Monica Boulevard. So I got involved with them, and they were the ones that got involved with Spector. So this is all now in LA. We're in 1965, Los
Your
Angeles.
first year in Los Angeles.
First year in Los Angeles. I got my black belt, and then all of a sudden Spector shows up. I ended up working for Phil. While I'm working for Phil, I ended up starting to teach private lessons. And one of them ended up Dennis Hopper. So I started teaching Dennis and Peter Fonda and a bunch of the younger actors in town. And as I said, one day Dennis says to me out of the blue, "Have you ever thought about doing this for the movies?" I knew nothing about it. So he showed me all these different moves that you can do with cheating the camera. And a few weeks later, he took me down to Paramount, introduced me to one of the stunt coordinators on Mannix. That's how I got involved in the movie business. I started teaching Mike Connors and his kids, started working on different television shows. And that's how, that just came out of the blue. And this was I started in the 1966.
So now in the 60s and 70s, you got a lot of things going on. You got your Hollywood career going on, training the actors, you're working in movies, doing choreography, so on and so forth. And then you got your martial arts, where you're dealing with people who are martial arts people.
That's good. I'm still training.
You're still training and doing all that.
Exactly. So I'm teaching and I'm training. And then what happened is that in 67, I met Mel Bruno. And Mel Bruno convinced me to go to Japan and train at the Kodokan.
Now, I'd like to back up a little bit. Like,
Sure.
so you just met him on by chance, or you're training him because he was like, how did it come about?
I was doing karate and judo simultaneously. He happened to do a seminar at the judo club that I was training in Hollywood called the Hollywood Dojo. Another guy started talking. So we, it was fun because his name was Emilio and my name is Emil. So sort of like, one of those weird things. So we ended up having coffee, and I told him I've been training with, in Canada, and I've been training here. He said, "Well, you should go to Japan." I said, "What do I do in Japan?" He said, "I have a very good friend. His name is Kotani Sensei. He's a ninth degree black belt in Japan." He says, "I'll send you a letter of introduction. Go train with him." So in the summertime,
In judo, this.
in judo. So what I was starting to do. And then when I went to Japan, to the Kodokan, I also realized, schmuck, here I am. They got the best karate in the world. So I ended up going to the JKA. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I was at the Kodokan. And then in the evenings, I was at the JKA with Nakayama.
Wow.
So I was there for first time I went there, I was there for 3 weeks, and I kept doing that every summer. Once I went there, I came back, started working again and training. And summertime, I would go to Japan sometimes I would go 3 weeks, 4 weeks, trained at the Kodokan, and also trained at the JKA. And then what happened is that the karate school that I was training with ended up closing up because one of the guys passed away. So this was 1970. And one of the places that me and Spector used to hang out all the time was a Troubadour, because that's where all the music people were. So I was very familiar with the place. And one day I'm driving past the Troubadour, and all of a sudden I see a guy put a big sign in the window says, "Place for sublease." So I pull over. Out of the blue, I wasn't really thinking about it. I walked in and I said, "What, where, how?" He said, "Well, this used to be a hair salon. I'm 75 years old. I'm closing the place. If you want it, I'll let you have it. I have a 3-year lease for $350. You can have it." So I thought I've already had some private clients. I was already making money. And oftentimes I had to find places to teach them. So it wasn't always convenient. I said, "You know what? Out of the blue, I'll grab it." So in January of that year, I opened up the dojo,
1970.
1970.
Now, for the viewers, and of course, again, we have to go forward and back because you've had such a prolific career. 1970, Did you have any idea that in 50 years you'd still be there?
No, no idea.
No.
I just, it was just a dojo. I mean, quite frankly, what I was doing is I was getting my degree in anthropology. What I always wanted to do was be an anthropologist. But what I found out after graduation is that, in the old days, 10 years ago, you could get grants to go all over.
Yeah.
Grants have all dried up. So I was making money, so I decided to stay, and I was good at teaching. I was very comfortable. So I was doing that while I was doing movies. For example, in the old days, unlike today, most of the TV shows and movies were filmed here. So I could work all day at Paramount and run down to the dojo at 7:30 and teach a class. So it all worked out very well. So what had happened is that I was making money, I was getting clients, so I started forgetting about doing anything else, and that's how the whole thing came about. But it wasn't in my head that I was going to end up teaching and continuing to teach.
Now you say you trained worked with some of the Beach Boys.
I trained with Brian Wilson,
Okay.
Dennis. I trained all those guys. I had the Buffalo Springfield. I can name you a bunch of people that I trained with. I also trained a lot of executives that ran Snub Garrett was one of the biggest producers in town.
Oh.
I trained him for years.
Was it Dennis that had some association with the Manson family and Charles Manson? Is that who that?
Dennis was.
It was Dennis,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
All those guys were involved with that.
Oh, were they? Okay.
So it was, as I said, pure luck. I had no intention of ever being in the movie business.
So now
I was there.
to back up to 65, you get here, you're training, all that stuff. Who was the first prolific martial artist that you came into contact when you arrived here?
Probably Ed Parker.
Ed Parker. And what year was that?
65.
The same year.
Yeah, because at 65 I went down to the internationals.
The second, so that would have been the second internationals. Yeah, the
Second
first one was 64.
That's correct.
So you went down. Did you go down as a competitor or just as a visitor?
We just went down to see it because remember, I was training in Shotokan. Shotokan was very traditional. They did not get involved in any other what they call open tournaments. And that's what I was used to, most traditional. I didn't really know of all the other systems and styles. So that's another freaky thing. Here's what happened. I went down to the tournament. While I was outside standing in line to get a hot dog or something like that, a guy behind me started talking to me, ended up being Joe Himes.
Wow.
So Joe Himes and I started getting friendly. He asked for what I was doing, And he said, well, it just so happens one of my best friends is from, not from Hungary, but from Poland. And he says, I'd like you to meet him. And I said, what's your involvement in the arts? He says, well, I'm training with Parker, and come on in and I'll introduce you. So he took me into we went in and he introduced me to Ed Farkas. That's how I got to meet him.
What was your impressions of Ed Parker when you met him? Were you aware of who he was?
No idea.
No
I
idea.
the fact that he, he promoted the tournament. Nice guy, very friendly, very warm.
Because you were very acquainted with him right up to when he passed away.
Afterwards. Yeah, but that was the first time I met him. But remember, at that particular time, I was like this. I knew Judo, traditional, Shotokan karate, and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, but I knew nothing about all the other different martial arts, only for one reason. There's almost nothing written about them. You remember, Black Belt magazine only came out a few years earlier, and they only had limited edition. It wasn't like they had every month. So the few things that you read about was like negligible. And at the time that I started in 65, you could probably not, there probably wasn't more than 5 dojos in all of the, the Los Angeles area.
Yeah, so let's take us through that. You opened in 1970. And you were on Santa Monica and Doheny.
Santa Monica.
So take us through that. It's amazing how sparse it was. It's like
Ed Parker had a dojo in Santa Monica. He had a dojo Santa Monica Boulevard in Sepulveda. The only other guy that had a big dojo was Bruce Tegner, who was in Hollywood. Then there was another guy way out in the valley in North Hollywood, was what's his name? Bill Rusaki. He had a dojo. Nishiyama had a dojo way downtown. The only other guy that I heard about, but I never knew about him up until much later, was Oshima. So I could probably at that time, there was no more than 8 dojos.
Lewis, Wallace, and Norris had not yet opened, or had they?
No, at that time they had not.
Right.
Lewis opened up, we talk about 60, Lewis opened up in 69. So they opened up 1 year before me. And so in 70, yes, Lewis was also in the valley. But other than that,
So you're talking a little bit more than basically a handful of
Yeah.
handful of if a dozen. Now I'm sure that there must have been some scattered around, but I didn't know about it. I know that what's his name was there was one guy who was teaching Okinawa Tay, but way near downtown Chinatown, Gordon D. Versola. But other than that,
Now was Ark Wong, when did his school open? He was teaching the 5 animals in Chinatown.
I'm sure that, but remember those guys were like, I mean, you couldn't find them. It wasn't like you opened the yellow pages,
Right.
you had a dozen people. So yeah, I'm sure that if you drove around and there were little places but for all intent and purposes, commercial dojos, I will guarantee you by 70 there were no more than 10.
Yeah.
Right.
You know.
Now take us through Mel Bruno's story. It's a phenomenally interesting, little known story, and how you met him, and how that whole thing came about. But
Well, as I said, I met Mel Bruno in a judo club. Mel and I got friendly. Mel wasn't living in LA at that time. He was traveling around, and every time he would come in town, we would get together, have coffee. And of course, when I opened a dojo, he'd come by all the time. What made Mel so interesting is that he was realistically unknown to the average martial artist. In 1951, he became the instructor, what they call the hand-to-hand combat instructor to the Strategic Air Command. So he had judo clubs opened up. He was teaching all the generals. And then he convinced the generals that what he wanted to do is take all of these trainers, the guys that were instructors, what they call
Drill sergeants.
drill sergeants, to take them to Japan and give them a 3-month course in all the various martial arts. So what he did in 1952, he took 40 guys to Japan. But because he wanted to be open-minded, he didn't want to just do judo, he wanted to include other martial arts, but he didn't have any contacts. So there was a guy named, I don't remember his name, but I'll think about it, in San Francisco that he happened to know that had studied karate beforehand. So he went to him, he said, I'm taking a bunch of guys to Japan. I also like them to train in karate. I know nothing about it. Give me an address. So what had happened is that the guy that was training in karate in Japan right after the war had studied with Otsuka in Wadoryu. So he gave him that address. Mel got to Japan and misplaced the address. But the first thing he did was obviously take his guys to the Kodokan to train, because he was involved in judo. He knew everybody there. So while he was there, he said to them, he says, do you know anything about karate? Said, so all the judo guys said, yeah, as a matter of fact, the old Kodokan is where the Japan Karate Association is now training. So they hooked him up with Funakoshi. Interesting. I have a picture with him and Funakoshi. And so they hooked him up with Funakoshi. So he ended up training those guys in Shotokan karate. When he saw karate, he took a bunch of the guys back to the United States. Judo, karate, Aikido, took all these guys. And he was telling me, he says, everybody wants to know about karate. They traveled to 50 Air Force bases. And everybody ever talked about it because judo was already very common in America. But nobody ever saw karate anymore. And when they saw these kicks and punches and breaking and all that, it's all everybody started talking about. So when he got back to Japan, he went to Nakayama and he said, you got to do this, you got to spread this around the world. And Nakayama says, I don't know anything about that. He says, listen, my specialty is putting together training manuals. So I'm going to put together a training manual, exactly how you do this. What you got to do is you start a training program just for instructors, what we call an instructors training program. Same way we do in the Army. It says in the Army we have instructors training program. Those are the drill sergeants. Says, I'll put it together for you. You hire guys and you send them out. You send first one to LA, one to Philadelphia, 2 sides of the thing. Next, you send one to the South, which was Louisiana. So you wrote out the whole thing for them. And it was interesting while we were talking. He said, listen, karate shmarati. If it would have been one or you, I would have sent those guys. It just so happens it was Shotokan. So those guys ended up. He says, and that's how the whole thing ended up. As a matter of fact, it's funny because years later, I was talking to Nishiyama sensei, and I happened to just out of the blue, I don't remember why, I brought up Mel Bruno. He said, oh, Mel Bruno sensei, I remember him. He came over there and he convinced Nakayama to open up, to send us over here. He says, oh, he was like raving about Mel. And he's one of those unsung heroes because he was very big in judo. At that time, he was actually the highest ranked judo guy in America, but nobody knew his involvement with karate. And it was his reason. It was because of him that karate became so. Shotokan karate became so big in America. People don't realize that by 1965, no, by 1970, Nishiyama had over 100,000 Shotokan students in America.
Wow, amazing.
Oh yeah, he was the biggest. The All America Karate Federation was gigantic. Much bigger than Parker, much bigger than anybody else.
Now let's talk about Jigoro Kana.
Okay. Well, one of the things that, that Mel was telling me is that one of the reasons that when Funakoshi first came over from Japan, the reason he came over is to do a
You're
demonstration.
talking about Jichin Funakoshi.
No, we're talking about Funakoshi.
Funakoshi, okay.
Gichin Funakoshi came over to Japan in 1917 to do a big demonstration of karate. His whole idea was, I'm going to come over here, I'm going to go back, which is what they've always done. You come over from Okinawa. But Kano was one of the guys that was there at the demonstration. So he invited Funakoshi to the Kodokan. He said, I'd like you to do a demonstration for my people. So Kano went over there, did a demonstration. Jigoro Kano said, this is great for Japan. You got to stay here and you got to teach it. Says, can't teach it here, but I'll introduce it to some people. They happen to be a Okinawan private school. Says, I'll introduce it to the headmaster over there. I bet you can start a dojo there. And I will introduce it to some of the high mucky mucks that I know, some admirals and some lawyers and all these guys. I guarantee they want to study this stuff. So he was the one that convinced Funakoshi to actually stay in Japan. He had no intention of doing it, but Kano was so well known in Japan at that time that with his influence, he knew that he could get this thing going. Kano was the one that actually got him into the first university. And once it opened up, then, Shotokan became the gigantic thing that it was. Now, it's interesting because people always think that Funakoshi started Shotokan. He never called the system Shotokan. What happened is in 1935, his students built him a dojo. Up to that time, there was no karate school. Karate was always taught either at the university or some gymnasium or a kendo school or something like that. So his students built him a dojo. And Funakoshi used to be a calligrapher and he used to write poetry. And he signed his name Shoto. That was his pen name. So Shotokan means the house of, because Kan is house. Shotokan means house of Shoto. So when they built the dojo, they put out a big sign saying Shotokan. And so that's why everybody started calling it Shotokan. Funakoshi never ever named the system Shotokan.
Shotokan means, is it House of the Pines?
Yeah, House of Shoto. Shoto's pinery.
Pine,
But
yeah.
that's how he signed his signature.
And that was the birth of Shotokan.
That was the birth of
Yeah.
Shotokan.
Wild.
Wild.
I never.
Yeah.
Most people think Shotokan. No, Shotokan just, everybody called it, where are you
Yeah.
going? I'm going to Shotokan. So it became a name of a system.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. So you initially started in judo.
Yes.
Did you have any interaction or trainings with Judo Gene LeBell?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I met all those guys. Obviously, when I came to LA, when I started training in judo, there was a lot of judo clubs. unlike karate, the judo a lot of places. So yeah, I met Gene LeBell. I went over to his dojo. I trained with him once or twice. But over the years, we became very friendly. He used to come over to my dojo. Yeah.
I always found Gene was a great guy.
Oh, absolutely.
I met Gene in 2015, I believe it was. We worked on a television show together.
Uh-huh.
And he was just such a great guy.
Oh yeah, he was
Very
terrific, yeah.
charismatic. Even at his age at that time, he was just
Happy-go-lucky.
yeah, just very charismatic, good guy.
1936.
I could put you on your butt with one finger. That's the one thing he could do. Put you on your butt with one finger.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about this guy.
Aikido or yeshiva? Yeah, well, Aikido, didn't come into this country till much later. It's Tohai.
Let's talk a little bit about those two.
Well, Tohai, Aikido was started in the 40s in Japan. It wasn't very well known. It was really an offshoot of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. So Aikido became big in the schools because it wasn't physical. It wasn't like people were killing each other. So he managed to get into a lot of the schools, and Aikido, especially with women, Aikido became very big. And in Japan, it started getting exposure. Tohai was one of his major students, and he ended up going to Hawaii and opened up the first Hawaiian Aikido school. And then slowly Aikido started growing. But until Steven Seagal came along with his Aikido, Aikido was almost nobody knew about it. It was very little written about it. Interestingly, Black Belt magazine at the early beginnings included a lot of Aikido stories. And the only reason is because the guy that founded, Black Belt magazine was an Aikido student under Tohai.
That was Miti Uehara.
Uehara, yeah. So Mito was an Aikido student, so he started promoting Aikido.
Now, he was an Aikido student of Tohai
Tohai, yeah.
in Hawaii.
In Hawaii.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, James. I'm sure you would know this or not, but in the original Karate Kid movies, I think in number 2, and they go over to Japan. They had shown a picture of somebody on the wall, and I'm fairly certain this is the guy that they show the picture of. That is apparently Mr. Miyagi's grandfather or ancestor at that time, and I'm almost 100% that
I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think it was Morihei Ueshiba edition.
I would imagine that they'd be smart enough to know not to put his picture in there.
Really?
Because he was very well known.
I think I remember.
And the only reason
Well, you know what I'm talking about, right?
It's not Morihei Ueshiba.
Really? It's somebody in the Aikido world, because I remember either reading in a one of those forums or something along those lines that the picture was up there, and they're like, "That's not even a karate guy. That's an Aikido guy."
I don't think I'd have to go back and look, but to the best of my ability,
it's possible.
It's possible. But
if there's anybody that knows, you'd be able to
I remember the picture when they go to Japan and they're in Miyagi's house.
Yeah.
And there's a picture.
Yeah.
I'd have to go. I haven't watched the movie in 10 years, but I recall it. The scene you're talking about, the picture, and I would bet it's not Morihei Ueshiba. But please say why you would say if they were smart, they wouldn't do it.
Well, if they were smart, they wouldn't do it because it was very well known.
Yeah.
And everybody knows. But now, I got to tell you, being involved in the movie business, some gal could have spawned an old photo and hung it up because they don't think, so it's easily plausible.
Yes.
I don't think it would be, but it's certainly plausible that the guy looks like got that look.
Yeah.
So I can certainly see that somebody who knows nothing about martial arts, who's the
art department,
the art department, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a decorator, but let's put this picture up. It looks good.
Yeah.
It's quite possible.
It's possible. I recall it, and I don't recall if he Morihei Ueshiba.
We'll
have to look it up.
We'll have to look.
The only reason I'm saying now it's more plausible because originally Demura was involved with them. But most of what Demura was doing was here in town. When they went to Okinawa, some gal could have just grabbed the picture and put it up there, so it makes more sense.
That's correct.
So that is plausible. If you go back and look at it.
Let's talk a little bit about
This guy?
His name won't come to me. What's his name?
Uh,
Won't come to me. He wrote several books. He was in Canada.
well, he was in San Francisco.
Was he in San
Yeah,
Francisco?
San Francisco is teaching. His name is of his old age. Yeah. He'll come to me.
Yeah.
Anyway. What about him?
Well, just talk a little bit about him.
Well, he was,
Was he Shitaru? Was he?
no. He had. Well, he was an eclectic martial artist. He trained in various martial arts. Mostly Okinawan style karate. He had trained in Shanghai after the war. He stayed in Shanghai and then he moved to San Francisco. He was mostly more than anything else. He was probably the first martial arts historian that started writing about martial arts books. And a lot of people sort of claim that they trained with him, but
Yeah. Let's
most
talk a
people-
little bit about Fumio Demura Sensei.
Fumio Demura. Well, Demura came here 75. I met him. 65. I met Demura. Yeah, I met Demura first time he came here when he did a demo at Farcus tournament. Incredible guy. Of all the Japanese instructors I ever met, he was the most honorable. He had no qualms about training people that were either Japanese or non-Japanese. I'll tell you a funny story about Demura, which one of my pet peeves has always been over the years. And we're talking about already 80s, 90s. All of a sudden, you had all these guys, master, grandmaster, great grandmaster, Shihan.
Supreme Grandmaster.
Talked about this. before,
Everybody
yeah.
became like, you know. So one day I happened to be at the Dragon Fest. So, Matsuda gets up there and says, we're going to introduce, and, Grandmaster, da 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 da. The guy goes up there. Then Great Grandmaster, then Shihan, this guy, that guy. And it just so happens that Demura happened to have a booth there at that one particular day. And I know Demura very well. So I walk up to him and say, Sensei, so let me ask you something. He says, what would you like to be called? He says, what are you talking about? He says, well, you're certainly much higher ranked than any of these goons are going up. He says, Sensei. It's the only thing I'd called. I said, so why? He said, I want to know about this thing. He says, ridiculous. He says, you go to Japan, and I was in Japan. Nakayama Sensei was the highest ranking Shotokan guy. Everybody called him Sensei, not Shihan, not anything else. He says, it's insane what goes on in America. So he says, you want to call me anything, you call me Sensei. That's what Demura. Low level, low key, incredible martial artist. As far as I'm concerned,
Very humble.
the most humble martial artist I ever met in Japan. Knowing all these other Japanese, not Nishiyama, not humble at all. So a lot of the Japanese were much more oriented toward their culture. Demura said, anybody who wants to train is willing to work hard. That's the way it should be.
Now, what was Kubota? Because I speak to a lot of people and they say, they were very impressed with the first internationals,
Uh-huh.
with the demonstration of the, they always say the banging of the lump,
Sure,
down,
banging
the
of the
hands down, the
senses, yeah.
shins.
I like Kubota.
Yeah.
Again, and I met these guys at the early days. He had a dojo in Hollywood. The difference between Kubota and Kubota was, even though it was very Japanese, what he was teaching was really more not as traditional. He was more to the combative aspect. He started his own martial arts system. Gisen was some I don't remember the name of it, but he was more oriented toward the combative element, sparring. Where Demura was much more of the traditional, a lot of kata, a lot of training in that sense. So different mentality. Now, also very friendly, very warm, very pleasant, but on a whole different level than Demura. Demura was really very Japanese. Kubota got involved more Americanized. Both guys were nice guys. One of the things I did like about Kubota, is the fact that he was also not prejudiced against the non-Japanese. So he had a lot of good. Well, Val was a perfect example. A lot of really good non-Japanese students. As a matter of fact, I think one or two of them were in the first World Championships. So he had some really tough students. He had a lot of police people that went to him. And a lot of these guys are big and strong. And so, like Val, and they were really good martial artists. He was a good instructor, just he had a different way about him.
How was Oshima?
Totally different. Oshima was like,
First of all, he was Shotokan, right? Was he
well,
Shotokan?
he was Shotokan, but he was old Shotokan.
What? Now explain. What does
Okay.
that mean?
Here's what happened. When Funakoshi started teaching Shotokan, it was a much different kind of Shotokan as we know it today. Higher standards, stances, much smoother movements, not as much focus on power, much more evading, much more moving around. For all intent and purpose, if you want to compare, it was a softer style. But what had happened is that once the Americans started coming in, is after the war we're talking about, and started training, they were big guys. So a lot of the JKA people started to realize that this soft stuff is not going to be effective. So they modified it. They took scientific methods of figuring out how to get the most punch out of it. Like they started really working on body dynamics, a lot of body rotation, deep stances, locking your body. So they taught what we call modern karate or modern Shotokan. On the other hand, Oshima, who had trained under Funakoshi, stayed and continued to teach what he called old Shotokan. So if you watch Oshima, if you see, for example, a Shotokan kata, boom, Oshima's kata is more soft. Same move, identical as far as the move goes, much softer, much less focus on power, much more movement. So that's what the big difference is. Now, Oshima by far is a top instructor, just a whole different concept. So he was not involved with the JK whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I don't know how many people know this, but Nishiyama was originally bought out by Oshima because what had happened is Oshima started teaching here at Caltech in very early 1965. But only to it was very enclosed. Only the Japanese were training with him. So what had happened is he opened up a dojo, and they called him back to Japan because they wanted him to help translate Funakoshi's book. So he was involved. He knew Nishiyama, so he called up Nishiyama and said, "Would you take over my dojo for 6 months while I'm gone?" So Nishiyama said, "Sure." So Nishiyama came over. The JKA at that time said, "By all means, we'll sponsor you." So they sent Nishiyama over to take over Oshima's dojo. Now, what happened is Nishiyama was teaching much farther, much more JKA style. And a lot of people liked that more so than what Oshima was teaching. So when Oshima came back, Nishiyama said, "Well, my dojo now." And so they had a big, doo-doo. And Nishiyama took over and took most of Oshima's students away. So Oshima had to open up somewhere else. And so there was always bad blood between the two.
Now, what are your thoughts on the softer Shotokan opposed to the rigid, very powerful body dynamics driven Shotokan?
I think that to be effective, you need the second. I think the first one is good, but nowhere near as effective. I think that's what makes Shotokan is what it is that a small person can generate an enormous amount of power. And so therefore what you're going to do is going to be effective. The softer kind of Shotokan is more nebulous to me. Yes, if you're a big guy and you don't need all that power, that's fine. But if you're an average person, I think that nothing beats what the JK had developed. They were very scientific. They went about it in a very scientific way, and I think that's you could see these kind of guys are devastating when when you see Nishiyama. I'll never forget Nishiyama one day. Frank Smith, whom I don't know if you know about, Frank Smith was one of the toughest guys you've ever seen in Shotokan. Big. He was a fireman. I remember one day He was doing a lunge punch on Nishiyama, and Nishiyama did an inward block and literally spun him. I mean, like almost spun him around.
And Nishiyama would have been a lot smaller than him.
Nishiyama was half his size.
Yeah.
But it was that dynamic internal energy that Shotokan teaches that, that Oshima's old style Shotokan doesn't teach.
Now, in your opinion, is that overrated? Not regarding Shotokan, in martial arts in general, because you can take any, even though Kempo is a hard banging style, and Shotokan's a hard banging style, like a very crash system, and then you got Tai Chi, for example, and so on. Can't you do all of them slow and powerful as well and add body dynamics?
Sure you can, but in a real fight,
Yeah.
not going to happen.
Yeah, you got to be explosive.
It's not going to happen. I was a bodyguard for almost 8 years. Not going to happen.
And you have to train.
I mean, here's the difference. I'll give you an example. If you train 20 years in almost anything, you're going to be okay. You're going to be able to defend yourself. Well, let's take Kung Fu example. One of the things that Kung Fu relies on is precision. Meaning is that you got to hit the guy in the right place. A lot of focus on where you're hitting him. What they call vital areas. Well, you get into a fight, and then you have to try and pick exactly where you're going to hit again. Yeah, it's going to be nebulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you got the power that doesn't matter where the hell you hit him, he's going to go down.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Makes a big difference.
Now go back to Frank Smith. Who was Frank Smith?
Frank Smith was, in my opinion, the toughest guy Nishiyama ever developed. And he was as good as any Japanese karate guy. He was a fireman, very strong, very big, dynamic. He was one of Nishiyama's, not one of, but he was by far Nishiyama's best student. But I'm just giving you the example of a guy like Nishiyama being able to move Frank Smith. Is amazing. So listen. One of the things that, although I trained in Shotokan and stayed in Shotokan, I looked at all the styles. I even trained with Norris in Tang Sudo, which is basically Taekwondo.
Chuck Norris, that is.
Yeah. For all intent and purposes, as far as just a simple basic style, you can't beat it only because it focuses on what, in my opinion, makes all the difference in a fight. That's how to generate power and how to move quickly, dynamically. You don't need to learn 350 techniques. I used to joke about Parker. I said, God, you teach so many techniques. He said, no, I don't. He says, I teach it in a variety of ways. I said, well, like what? He says, a claw. Yeah. He says, bottom claw, side claw, right claw, left claw. That's 5 moves. Same exact technique. But everybody thinks they're learning 5 things.
Well, it's true. There was Mr. Parker said at one point, because his techniques, for example, he's got a technique called thundering hammers. He's got 5 swords. He's got the sleeper. He's got reprimanding the bears. He's got the bear and the he's got the desperate falcons. All these exuberant names. And someone asked him on him, Mr. Parker, why do you create all these names? Well, he has a push technique called parting wings in the hip. And so, well, if I tell you to come in tomorrow, and I'm going to teach you defense against a push, it is what it is. But if I tell you to come in tomorrow, I'm going to teach you a technique called parting wings. He says,
Retrieves that.
a light bulb goes off. You're going to want to learn it. That's why the names are there. But of course, Parker was a very smart man. But the names are not just there for that. They mean a lot of things, got to do with the strikes and so on and so forth. But that's a whole other conversation. Take us through.
Well, I'll tell you a story. I want to hear a story. I went into one of the, after I met Parker, I went to his dojo one day. So he happened to have, on his desk, he had a piece of paper. And I looked at it, and it was a yellow belt test. And he had 40 moves on it. So by that time, I was friendly with him. So after class, I said, yellow belt is the first belt. He says, you teach 40 moves? That's when he says, you don't understand. So she said, that's what the Japanese make a mistake. He says, they only teach one, and you got to do it 1,000 times. He says, I teach 40 moves, but they're really basically only 10 with variations. But every time you walk in, you're thinking you're learning something new, and all you're really learning is a variation on the same thing. And people are paying to learn. And I was paying to repeat the same exact thing over and over again. And I thought that was brilliant.
Smart
I thought it was
business.
very
He was a
smart.
very smart man.
Oh,
And he was a
absolutely.
brilliant martial artist. I mean, if Ed Parker got within 12 inches of you, you had a problem. He could move.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
as a businessman, it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Because at that time I didn't have my dojo, so I wasn't thinking in terms of. But I realized what he said made sense, because in my dojo, all you did was the same exact thing 1,000 times.
Now, did you take anything?
It paid off, but all I'm saying is that oh yeah, absolutely. Because when I opened my dojo, I still taught, but I also added a lot of things. Like, for example, I added a lot of self-defense moves that in Shotokan you don't need.
So did you make them up, or you took them from another system?
No,
Or they were there?
no. I mean, I knew these stuff because
Yeah,
I had a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. All I'm saying is that my training, for example, when you walked in, after I taught you how to do a downward block 1,000 times, I'd make sure you teach your front choke. In the old dojo, you'd never learn that until you were a black belt. And I'd make sure that, by the time you got to be brown belt, you know how to take a gun away from somebody. Wasn't in the Shotokan curriculum, but to get a black belt in my system, which is why I called it combat Shotokan when I opened, you needed those things. Wasn't the Shotokan syllabus, but as far as the techniques were, they were the same, you know? And what I also did is I started to put a lot less emphasis on, in my opinion, techniques that, in my opinion, were really useful. I mean, when you're going to use a sword hand block in a fight.
Yeah.
But now, the reason they do that, because it teaches you, how to move your hand in a simultaneous motion. So it has practical elements, but not for a fight.
Well, you have that thing where you have a training method, and
That's
you have a
what
fighting.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
So the point is that for training, it's excellent, but to spend as much time on it as people get tired of it.
Yeah.
So what I realized is that you had to change certain things. And by the time I opened my dojo, I've been training already, God knows how many years. So I felt comfortable enough to change the things. Not that I want to change the techniques, it's just how I approach teaching it. Like, for example, if you watch a side kick, right? How did the Japanese do a side kick?
Yep. Straight.
No, what part of the body hits with a side kick?
Oh, the heel? Or is it the
The edge of the edge
Edge of the foot.
Came on
Yes.
the edge of the
Side edge of the
Yeah,
foot.
edge of the
Dude,
foot,
they
yeah.
turn it down. That's right.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the difference between some Japanese. They all kick with the edge of the foot, but some will have, some will have the big toe straight, and the other toes are kind of tilted down.
But for almost every one of them, still do the side edge of the foot.
Yes.
Now, there's a problem with that. It is very, very advantageous because it's sharp. So it penetrates more. The problem is, if your distancing isn't exact, your ankle is going to get broken.
Yeah.
So when I teach it with the flat foot.
Yeah.
Because that way, if the distance isn't correct, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting because when I brought that up to the Mora sensei, because I had a discussion with them, I said, Sensei, why do the Japanese teach side kick with the side edge of the foot? He says, it's traditional. I said, explain that. He said, a side edge of the foot is meant to kick underneath the armpit.
Oh, in a blade-like effect.
Blade, because it goes upward in the
Yeah.
blade line. I said, why? He says, because in the old days, the Japanese had armor. And the only place the armor wasn't connected was where you needed to move. So they trained to use the kicks for under the arm as opposed to kicking it into.
And they had a sword too.
But forget the sword. The point is that this
Yeah.
is a vulnerable area.
Yeah.
So therefore, if you watch the traditional Japanese, they don't kick this way, they get upward like a
Well,
snap.
if you look at Demura Sensei, he demonstrated that a bunch of times where he side kicks into the armpit, even when he's down on the ground.
Yeah.
He side kicks
So-
up.
That's the reason they do that. He
Ye-
said. But that doesn't mean that the other way is wrong. Because as a matter of fact, he says, in a real combat, the concept is to use the real foot. But the Japanese are very traditionalist, so they tend to stay with tradition. Not necessarily right or wrong,
That
but
makes
that's what
sense.
they did.
Now, the interesting about it is that in Ireland, when I first started karate, they called that a blade kick.
Yeah, whatever.
You know, if you struck with the side of the foot, it was a blade kick. If you struck with the flat of the foot, it was a side kick.
Yeah.
Even though the motion was the same, it's the angle of the foot that was different.
Right, but you see, the Japanese don't separate that.
Yeah.
You know, to them, it's all the same thing. You know, so I'm just giving you an example. So when I opened it, and one of the reasons I did that, because of my discussion with Parker, I realized if you're running a dojo and you want to keep people, you have to do certain things. I still train traditional,
Keep them
and I, you know,
trained.
and I still taught solid karate, so I didn't water it down.
Mm.
I just changed it to the point where, in my opinion, I think the people that walk it, because one of the things I've always said, 95% of people, I don't care what anybody says about this idea of, you know, of people walking because they want to get in shape. People walk into a karate dojo because they want to learn how to fight.
Yes.
The secondary element, they realize all of a sudden they're getting in shape. So, you know, and then everybody started pushing the thing, karate will get your shit. Everybody walks into dojo for that same reason. And if you don't supply that to the average person, they're going to have, that's why the dropout rate in the dojo is so big.
And they're
Because a lot of
offensively
instructors, I will sit here and guarantee you that 80% of the instructors that are black belts have never had a fight in their life, and they wouldn't know what goes. That doesn't mean they're not good
I
martial
think that's
arts.
higher than 80%.
And it doesn't mean that they can't go in there and spar on the dojo and be very good at it,
Yeah.
because that's sport karate, a different ball game. But as far as I'm concerned, most of them never had a fight. They wouldn't know the, you know, that element of it. And so therefore, what they're teaching in their mind, they're teaching the right thing to their students,
Mm.
you know. But in my opinion, that's why people walk. So right off the bat, you got to start doing that. You got to show them things that are logical, simple, even if it's not karate, even if it's jiu-jitsu or judo. It doesn't matter. What difference does it
Well,
make?
like you said to me one time, it's all great, fine and dandy and beautiful and lovely, but if you can't overcome the element of surprise, it's all useless.
Of course.
Mm.
But that's, you know,
Yeah.
that these are the kind of things that they don't, you know, you have to remember is that because of the fact that the Japanese are so big on repeat, 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 by the time you get to a black belt, you're good at what you're doing. A lot of American dojos, they don't do that. You know, they're right off the bat, you start to spar,
Yeah.
but there's no technique involved, you know, throwing all these, you know, flippy floppy things and whatever. Okay. Did you really think you're going to score a point on your tournament and then knock a guy out on the street? Not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
You know, but to make it a sport, you almost had to do it that way because otherwise it'll be, you know, silly.
Yeah.
So my attitude about it is, it's not the name, it's what you teach people. If you teach people good karate, they'll be effective. If you teach them crap and you teach them 350 techniques, they're not going to remember half of that anyway.
Now, anybody who, you know, knows martial arts on some sort of a history level knows all the famous names that came out of the West Coast. But I'm not sure if there were as many or as much on the East Coast, but there were enough and a lot.
Oh yeah, you see, that's the big problem in American karate was the following. Black Belt magazine was a West Coast magazine. Most of everything that was promoted was on the West Coast. Ed Barker's tournament was on the West Coast. That became very big, and it was promoted because of the fact that Black Belt magazine, that, you know, and Ed Parker was teaching movie stars and all that, and Hollywood was here. But there was just as much, if not more, in many ways, going on the East Coast, you know, even earlier than on the West Coast. And a lot of people forget that there was the Southeast, you know, Texas and all those, but there were a lot of people there.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, did a lot of these people, did Ned Parker's internationals attract people from all over, not just the West Coast? I mean, didn't you have people from the East
Oh
Coast?
yeah,
as well?
absolutely. But you know, but the West Coast was where you got to play.
Mm.
Oh yeah, no, but I'll give you an example. Thomas LePuppet, who's an East Coast guy, was as good as any of these guys. But until much, much later, I never heard of him.
Yeah.
You know, later on when, you know, when karate started spreading and all of a sudden instead of black belt, you had 50 magazines, you know, people started knowing these things.
Let's talk about LePuppet a little bit. So what was his deal?
Puppet is great. The Puppet's, you know, trained with George Cofield. George Cofield had the biggest black karate dojo in, you know, in on the East Coast. Terrific guy, you know. The puppet was as good as any of these guys, Shotokan guy, you know. Never got to play, never got the recognition he deserves, you know. There was a lot of guys. I mean, on the East Coast, don't forget, guys like, I'll give you, one of my pet peeves, is with guys like, they open up the museum here. They don't give credit to these guys. Guys that, well, best example is Chuck Merriman. Chuck Merriman was competing and winning tournaments all over the East Coast years before he ever got to the West Coast and became famous because finally, they gave him recognition.
Great
But
martial
he
artist.
was there for years and years ago. I mean, so many top. Gary Alexander. He was he won the first major karate tournament in North America.
Which was?
With the Canadian Nationals in 1960.
And who ran that?
That was Matt Soroka's tournament. Gary Alexander, nobody ever heard of Gary Alexander. I happen to know him because I met him while he was winning the tournament. But otherwise, wouldn't have known him. Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks had no name on the West Coast whatsoever. Martial art, there's not one article on Aaron Banks in any of the black belt.
But he had a very successful martial arts tournament, didn't he? Or the demonstrate and the.
Are you kidding? He was the most prolific martial arts promoter in American history. He had the martial arts world of on ABC World of Sports, late 1960s. He gave more top martial artists an opportunity to be shown and demonstrate their skills than anybody else on the planet. So show me one article in Black Belt magazine about Aaron Banks.
Is it because they didn't know about him?
Yeah, because they were focused on the West Coast. They didn't bother with it.
That was the only presence of media that was.
Yeah. Aaron Banks didn't come over here. He was over there.
Now let's talk a little about Ron Duncan. He was on the East Coast too, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
Now, what was Ron Duncan's deal?
Ron Duncan was the first to actually bring out ninja in the United States, way before, all these other guys. Never got any credit. Only time once Al Weiss opened up Official Karate magazine, much years later, the focus was on the East Coast. Then those East Coast players started getting credit. But remember, most people by that time on the West Coast were reading Black Belt magazine, and the East Coast, so it was really a totally separate thing. I think that the East Coast was much more eclectic, because there were much more different styles on the East Coast. On the West Coast, you mostly had the Koreans and Shotokan. On the East Coast, you had Gary Alexander with Ishinru, and Goju was gigantic because of all the Goju people there. You had at least 10 different styles that were really big on the East Coast where you didn't have that.
Well, you had a lot of styles here, Chinese styles, Kung Fu, and a lot of Filipino martial arts. But like you said, they weren't commercial.
They weren't commercial.
But so they were small groups. And in fact, until 1964, of which Ben Ragusa, Flora Villabreo's student, and he was the one who curriculumized Flora Villabreo's Kali system. Because in those days, the Filipino martial artists, they were just teaching you stuff, but they had no curriculum. It was just like show you a bunch of stuff, and he curriculumized Villabreo's system. But in '64, because Parker knew him very well, he gave him center stage to demonstrate, and then that blew up. So,
but it took years and years even before Kali and all that stuff caught on. Everybody wanted to know about it, but the only place we were teaching it was in Sacramento. Or, that area.
Well, Guru Dan was teaching it here in the LA area.
What?
Guru Dan was teaching it in the 70s and 80s here in the LA area.
Yeah, but that was in the 80s. Don't forget, you talk about the 60s.
Yeah.
When he did that demo was 65.
64. On 65,
he did
he did.
Yeah,
he did.
I didn't see the 64, but I know. Yeah. But my point is that was 64. You talk about 15, 20 years before Kali and all that, even before Santos started teaching it. Yeah. You talk about a big chunk of time.
Now,
because most of it was up north in the San Francisco and the Sacramento area, because that's where the Filipinos lived.
Yeah, Stockton was the melting pot.
Was the focus.
So now, talk a little bit about Moses Power. Because he's a very famous martial artist on the East Coast, but again,
East Coast is gigantic.
You see him, I think, in the documentary "The Warrior Within."
Yeah.
You don't see much about him, but
where is he in A Warrior Within?
He's that big African American guy. Was he Jiu-Jitsu?
Jiu-Jitsu.
And you'll see it when you watch it. Like,
Yeah, I'm
it's
gonna
a
have to
big guy.
rewatch
Go, what was who did he come from?
He trained under a guy named Visitation, Master Visitation.
Was he a Filipino?
No, he was a Vietnamese instructor. Had a dojo in New York. Moses Powell became a student, and Moses Powell opened up a dojo. And again, he was a big black guy, and he had a lot of black students, very good students. I actually bought Moses Powell. I was the first one to bring him out here on the West Coast
For what event?
to do demonstrations, and he demonstrated in my dojo, and I introduced him to all the different people here.
Did you have him at your event in Beverly Hills?
I had him at my event.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now that we're here,
Well, he didn't demonstrate it,
right?
did anything.
We'll talk about that a little bit, because what I have here is
you have
Yeah, the flyer, yeah.
you have all these guys, man.
yeah.
Yeah, no, but I mean, don't forget, I traveled. I came from the East Coast because of Toronto, and I traveled to
So what year was this event?
this was in 1973,
70
74.
74.
Yeah.
So this is Emil's event in 74, and it was in Beverly Hills. In fact, you had Mr. Parker, I think, support you in this, and a whole bunch of
We
people,
were
right?
supporting.
Now, did Moses Powell demo at this?
No, he don't.
So, let's go back to. We can go forward and go back a million times
Sure.
with you.
Go anywhere
So
you wanna
we
go.
have in 2002 a documentary came out, which was primarily Kempo Karate, The New Gladiators.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because right in the middle of that, you're the one demonstrating the do's and do nots of the tournament,
Mhm.
which is very impressive. Technically, it's very excellent what you did. What year was that footage actually filmed? We know it came out in 2002, but it was filmed years and years before
That was probably filmed in 75, I think.
at the internationals.
Yes.
And how did it come about that you were demonstrating? Was it Mr. Parker called you up and said, "Would you do this for us?" Or was there a committee running it? How did that come about?
I'd be lying if I remembered. I can't tell you. I don't know, but there are a lot of big people there. I think that was also. I think that was also financed by by Elvis Presley.
It was, and
Yeah.
the story has it that it lay in a truck,
Yeah, lay in a truck.
and then a gentleman called, was it George Waite,
George Waste found it.
found it.
Ended up taking it over to
Rising Sun.
Rising Sun, and they turned it into a tape. But
Now is all the
financed by Elvis.
now is all the footage on that from the same tournament, or is this something that was filmed
No,
over
I think it was.
filmed over years?
Well, it wasn't filmed over. It was filmed over a few years, but I think that it was all.
Because I was talking to Benny
Okay.
Urquidez, and he says that footage was either 69 or 71. You're saying 75. Does it go
I
back
can't
this
give you
far?
an exact.
Yeah, but it was
I think that some of the footage could have been that early because what Elvis did, what had Ed Parker take a group to Europe. I
correct.
think some of that footage that Benny's talking about was filmed earlier.
Yes, it's the
So
U.S.
Mick-
team
yeah.
fighting the Belgian team.
That's correct.
So you had John Natividad, Tom Kelly,
That's
Benny Urquidez, who
Ron Marchini.
Ron Marchini.
It's
He
a
got the
great opponent.
he got the bad cut in the eye at that, and they were fighting that Belgian.
Yeah, so that could have been 69, 70. Yeah.
Right. So maybe that's what Benny was
Yes,
referring to. that footage.
and Ed Parker was the guy that took the whole group over there.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it could
Yeah.
have been. But the point is that when they put the thing together, that they, because they continued filming, and then they were going to edit it together. So
Yeah.
it wasn't all just one tournament and all those.
Right.
Who,
So
who owns the rights to that now? Is there anyone that actually is it the person that
well,
found
it
it?
was released by Rising Sun. So I mean, legally, it'd be hairy, because it sat in a
I think theoretically George Waite owns the rights.
Yeah.
to it.
Okay.
theoretically, but it was released by a company who we both know very well.
Yep.
And
That's really
it was good that they put it out there.
it's wild that they just find that.
It was just sitting in a truck somewhere, you know.
Well, you got to remember that there's so much. This is one of my pet peeves. I might as well talk about, because when I started doing a lot of history things, what really ticked me off is so many people threw so much footage and pictures. I'll give you an interesting story. When I got involved with Mel, and I started working on the encyclopedia, one of the things was so difficult to find information and photographs and all these things. So what Mel says to me says, when I was in Japan, there was a guy who worked for the American Bugler, and the American Bugler was the military newspaper. He was a judo expert, but a photographer. He was what they call he was a photojournalist. He said at that time he had gone and took hundreds of feet of footage of Funakoshi, of Uyeshiba, all these old masters that were still alive in those days, and took photographs of all these guys. If you could track him down, he gave me his name. I don't happen to remember right now. But if you could track him down, you could find that stuff. There's got to be thousands of photos of that stuff. So as I started working on the encyclopedia, I'm looking. Finally, I met somebody that knew somebody that gave me a name. So I call up and I get his wife. And I said, well, I'm looking for so-and-so. And he said, unfortunately, so-and-so passed away 3 years ago. He says, but I was told that he's a photojournalist. He said, lots of pictures. Oh, says, yeah, they were sitting in the attic for years and finally got sick and tired of it. Oh, didn't know what to do with it. All of them.
Trashed it.
Now, according to Mal Bruno, what I'm told, that a lot of that footage ended up, not the photographs, but a lot of the 16 millimeter footage ended up somewhere in the archives of the United States Air Force. I said, well, how do you know that? Because I saw the footage and I took it to the Air Force and we put it in the vaults. I said, Mel, how do we find it? He said, are you kidding? They got 1 million feet of footage there. Good luck.
So it's in an Air Force vault?
An Air Force?
Where?
Good luck.
Where would you start?
I wouldn't have.
Or was it in, like, an Air Force vault? Do they have one in Los Angeles?
No, it was in an air. What I'm saying is that the Air Force kept, footage of every kind of thing, whether it was martial arts or whether it was flying, or who the hell knows. But they have, it's the same thing as a movie footage. Try and find footage of, of the edited version of something that you haven't seen.
But at least that could be narrowed down. For example, if they say
I
this.
tried for years and years.
So where would you start?
What I started doing is I called around all the Air Force. The judo guys were big in the Air
Yeah.
Force, and I had all these guys search. Yeah, there's no way of finding it. It probably wasn't even labeled. And if it was labeled on the side, nobody's going to find it.
And would it even be in good condition today?
Yeah,
Would it be
who knows?
totally wore out?
But I'm just giving an
Yeah.
example. But when I was doing the encyclopedia, I would talk to people who had boxes and boxes of stuff, 8 millimeter film. And by the time they went down, most of it was rotted because nobody cared about these things. I've got at my place, I've got 10,000 photographs that I keep in files. And if you need a picture of somebody, try and find a picture of, for example, best example I can think of is Gary Alexander. Nobody's got pictures of Gary Alexander. Why? Because everything was thrown out. Nobody cares. He's dead now. He passed away, last year. And, all his students, it's like with my kids. If I pass away, they're going to toss all that.
No, they're not. They're going to give it to me.
Well, yeah. That's why I should buy it before,
Yeah.
But it's true.
Yeah. I know what you're
I
saying.
see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's an actual fact.
Yeah.
I've got, right now, I'll bet you 10,000 magazines that not going to see the light of day.
Well, I'll tell you this, what's very interesting about what you're saying, and one thing that does come very good about the presence of social media these days is we're finally living in a time to where my grandkids can go back and look at my social media. My great grandkids, that social media will stay, and they can go back and they can look at pictures of their great grand. That didn't exist back then, and
But as I said, try and find these ones, like you guys, it's hard. I wanted for years, I just didn't know how to go about it, to do a history, like I wrote the history of martial arts in America in a book. People don't read books. Take that concept and do a historical thing, every week you put up a different thing on right from 1900 all the way through to do it, the history of martial arts in America.
If you did that on YouTube these days, that would be gold. If you were to imagine
something I could.
If you were imagine, you can imagine taking your entire portfolio database of what you have and getting that into a YouTube channel,
The thing
going in sequential order.
You're correct. The thing is then you have someone else steals that and takes it and goes, takes the credit for it, and someone like yourself doesn't get the credit. But
well, you call it something.
Yeah.
I want to call it, the martial arts, American Martial Arts Archives,
Yeah, that would be huge.
and do it, under my name,
AMA.
and then and you put it on a YouTube thing, and in the long run, it's your YouTube, so nobody can steal that particular thing. And you put up 1900, put up a picture and talk about, instead of just writing it, you talk about what's in the picture and who they were. I mean, people have no concept of, up until I first put it out, that Bruce Tegner was the first guy ever to do a martial art karate demo on an American television show.
Emil, there was a very famous martial artist / author very early on called Bruce Tegner.
Okay.
So talk a little bit about him and tell us. Mr. Parker told you a very famous story.
Well, here's the problem. Bruce Tegner, people don't know this about Bruce. Bruce Tegner's mother and father were judo experts. His mother was one of the first female black belts, had a black belt in judo in 1935, way before anybody else, They opened up the biggest judo club in Chicago. That's where Bruce was born. 1935, they opened up the Chicago Judo Dojo. They bought over a 6-degree black belt named Kawasaki to teach at the dojo. Bruce was basically, for all intent and purposes, born on the mat. 1948, the family moved to the West Coast. He opened up his school in 52. His father and mother were, by all accounts, the first martial artists to teach martial arts to the movie people. I have pictures of him teaching Bob Hope, all the top stars at 20th Century Fox in 1948-49. Bruce Tegner opened his dojo in 52, and he taught a lot of celebrities. But what made Bruce Tegner an outlaw in the martial arts world, that he was the first guy to not teach what they call pure martial arts. He came up with a concept called Jukado. He combined judo, karate, jiu-jitsu, aikido, all these elements into a system that he named. And everybody was upset about the fact that this American names a system. If you want to talk about mixed martial arts, he is theoretically the father of mixed martial arts, because he was the first guy to put it all together, and he had the balls to give it a name, which most people at that time didn't have.
Of what year was that?
1952.
52. I think he might be, because Kaju Kembo was created in.
But that was in Hawaii.
That was in Hawaii.
And nobody knew about that.
Right. Okay.
That came much, much later. In the continental United States, he was the first guy to teach a mixed martial arts system. A lot of people were against that because they wanted to teach Kempo, Shotokan, whatever other. So they never gave him credit.
And then history.
And then he started writing the books. Yeah. By 1960, 1959, he started writing books on karate, savate, aikido, things nobody ever heard of.
1959?
He's 59. But he did it in what we call not in these big solid books. What do you call these? Not hardcover. What's the other name? Soft cover. Yeah. So people could buy it for very little time. So I remember that, because I had many, many meetings with him. I liked the guy. He was very good. One day, I happened to have lunch with Ed Parker, and the name Bruce Tegner came up, and I said, "What do you think of Bruce Tegner?" And he said to me, "Are you kidding? Bruce Tegner? If it wasn't for Bruce Tegner, my dojo wouldn't have survived." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, 50% of his people in Pasadena, when they came in with a Bruce Tegner book looking for karate. Because remember, there was no karate around. It was Ed Parker. I wasn't around at that time yet. And Bruce Tegner, and there was no books on karate. Nishiyama's book and all these guys that weren't around, and Bruce Tegner had all these books. So everybody bought a Bruce Tegner book, and everybody wanted to know what karate was. So they looked him up, and there he was. He said, 50% of my people walked in with a Bruce Lee neighbor. I said, so how come he never got cut? I said, between you and I had invited him 20 times to the internationals. He didn't want to get involved.
Huh.
Which I didn't know about. I said, so you respect him? He said, absolutely. He was a terrific martial artist.
Now, why did he not want to appear to you? Just a very private individual?
Because of the fact that because so many people were down on him, and because of the fact that they never, they never.
Because he mixed the martial
Yeah,
arts.
because he makes the martial arts, and he didn't want to get into a whole controversy thing. I mean, talk to Gene LeBell about him. Gene LeBell trained with him. He said he was a terrific judo guy. He says his parents was one of the top judo people in this country. Gene LeBell did nothing but talk. As a matter of fact, I have photos of him and Gene LeBell working out together.
And then basically American history will tell you something completely different. They'll tell you that the first person to ever bring multiple martial arts to the United States was Bruce Lee.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody actually says it like that.
Well, not specifically
fair.
like that, but they
I
even
never actually-
says
well, I've
he was
never-
the first person, like in that Warrior Within, or no, is it Warrior Within or
The Warrior Within?
Yeah, the Warrior Within. He the person that's narrating it, which I'm not sure who the narrator was. Was it
Could be George Takei.
I'm not sure. But basically he says, Bruce was the first person to integrate specific martial arts together to create one art and actually call it a name. And then he says, and Bruce's quote was, he became the cause of his own ignorance by putting a name to it.
Well, a lot of people say things about Bruce Lee that are inaccurate.
Yeah.
For example,
Absolutely. For
this-
example, Bruce Lee never called it Jeet Kune Do. Do you know who came up with Jeet Kune Do?
Tell us that
Sterling
story.
Silverfan.
Really?
How did that come up?
It came up very simply. Sterling was Bruce's student. Bruce was doing all sorts of different things, and then he hired Bruce to do a show, where he played an instructor to a blind detective. I remember the name of the show. No,
Oh no,
no, it was
Longstreet.
Longstreet.
Yeah,
Longstreet.
And
James Francisco.
and,
Yeah, the blind.
in the script, they needed, Bruce wasn't teaching a specific system. He hadn't given it a system. So he just called it, he said, let's
Jeet
call it
Kune
some
Do.
Jeet Kune Do. Bruce loved it.
He even says it in that scene.
Yeah.
And
He says, it's teaching Jeet Kune Do. So he was actually the one that came up with the name.
Now there is a
Nobody knows
story.
about that.
There is a story where did you ever bump into a guy called Fu Kyung?
No.
Fu Kyung was a small little Chinese guy who worked at Ruby Chow's in Seattle.